a small town where everyone knew everyone, something strange happened. One dark and gloomy night, a group of teenagers went to an abandoned house that was famous for its creepy reputation. It was said that mysterious and terrible events had once occurred in this house, and it had been shrouded in legends and mysticism ever since. The teens burst into the abandoned building, armed with flashlights and cameras, intent on capturing all their adventures on video. They thought it was just a fun way to spend an evening. But something went wrong. As they made their way deeper inside the house, they began to feel a strange presence. Knocking sounds and rustles that could be blamed on the creaky floors, and the wind began to sound like whispers. They felt that someone or something was watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, one of the teenagers disappeared. They screamed his name. Anxiety overwhelmed them, but there was no answer. Fear gripped each of them, and they decided to run out of this cursed place. But the path back to the exit was not so easy. The maze of abandoned corridors seemed to change shape, and they got lost. The shadow they had felt earlier became increasingly heavy and frightening. Hours later, when the police finally found them, one of the teens was found in a state of shock, and the other could never be found. The teen who survived claimed to have seen ghosts and heard whispers from the past, and that something sinister was haunting them inside the house. Since then, this abandoned house has become a place of the most terrible legends, and no one dares to enter its dark walls for fear of awakening the evil that sleeps there since ancient times. In a small village buried in dense forests lived an old woman known as Sinister Emily. Her house was isolated from the rest of the world, surrounded by thickets of dark trees and wattles of brush. The villagers avoided passing by her house, convinced that it was haunted by evil spirits. One day, a young couple decided to go on a journey through the woods, their path taking them past Sinister Emily's house. They ignored the warnings of the locals, believing them to be superstitions, and decided to spend the night in this abandoned place. After sunset, they approached the house and knocked on the door. No one answered, and they entered. It was cold and gloomy inside, and a feeling of uncertain dread gripped them. But they settled down for the night and tried to ignore their anxious thoughts. The night passed quietly, but at dawn they found that they could not get out of the house. The door and windows were locked, and the walls seemed to shrink around them, creating a feeling of terrifying crampedness. With each passing hour, they felt something sinister coming over them, as if the darkness itself was coming to life and surrounding them. Fear overwhelmed them as they heard footsteps through the house, inhuman whispers filling the air with ominous curses. They realized that they had fallen into Sinister Emily's trap, and that the night they had spent in her house was the beginning of their nightmare. Their screams disappeared without a trace into the deafening darkness, and no one has seen them alive since. The story of what happened to this couple has become a legend in the village, and now no one dares to approach the house of Sinister Emily, knowing that within its walls lurks an evil that knows no mercy. A small town surrounded by dense forest lived a family that was famous for its strange customs. Their house was old, with dark windows, an attic that was the subject of dark rumors, and an old cemetery just outside the yard. The people of the town shunned this family, calling them cursed and wizards. One dark night, when the moon was hidden behind the clouds, strange events began to happen in the town. heard mysterious sounds from the forest, moans and whisper that made the blood run cold in their veins. Strange shadows were felt at home, and cats and dogs began to howl as if portending trouble. The next morning, the townsfolk discovered that several people had disappeared without a trace. Among them were children. Panic gripped the town, and people began to blame the mysterious family, accusing them of witchcraft and kidnapping. However, when the local guards decided to check the family's house, they found it empty. No one could find any trace indicating that they were responsible for the disappearances. Since then, the town has never found peace. The story of what happened has remained a mystery. Some claimed that the family was cursed, while others believed that their home was haunted by an evil that caused the disappearances. As time passed, the town became abandoned, and its residents moved away, leaving behind only the memory of the terrible events that took place the night their neighbors disappeared. In a small town, lost among dense forests, lived a girl named Olivia. She was an ordinary child who loved to play with her friends and wander through the woods in search of adventure. But one day, when she went into the forest with her two best friends, something went wrong. They got lost in the deep thickets of the forest, and the further they went, the stranger the surroundings became. It was as if the trees began to speak to each other in whispers, and the shadows took on a living form. Olivia's friends sensed that something was wrong and tried to persuade her to return home, but Olivia was stubborn. Suddenly, they came across an old abandoned house that seemed strange and frightening. But Olivia, ignoring her friends' warnings, decided to go inside, claiming that inside they would find answers to their questions about the mysterious events in the forest. They passed through the door and entered an abandoned corridor. Light only penetrated through cracked windows, creating ominous shadows on the walls. As they moved deeper inside the house, they began to hear strange sounds, moans, creaks, and rustles that made their hearts sink with fear. Suddenly, at the very end of the hallway, they saw something horrible. An old, dusty doll that had something incomprehensible and sinister about it. This doll's hair was braided into knots, its eyes were mottled with cracks, and its smile seemed like death itself. Olivia decided to move closer to examine the doll, but at that moment something slammed behind their backs. They turned around and saw that the door through which they had come had disappeared, and they were trapped. Suddenly, the doll began to move. Her eyes lit up with fire, and her arms began to move on their own. She approached Olivia's friends, step by step, as if she were alive. Desperate to get out of the trap, they realized that they couldn't get out of here alive. The doll turned out to be part of the dark ritual that had brought them here, and now they would have to pay the price for their curiosity. This story is a reminder that sometimes curiosity can lead to dire consequences, especially if you play with things that are better left alone. The family lived in a dark, secluded house on the outskirts of town. The owners of the house often heard strange noises at night, but did not pay much attention to them. One day, when they went on vacation, leaving the house empty, the neighbors began to notice a strange glow in the windows and hear footsteps at night. They decided to report it to the police. The police officers decided to check the house and found that someone was living inside. They broke into the house and went to the basement, where they found a horrifying picture. In the basement were found captive people, among them a family that had gone missing. The owner of the house turned forever depriving them of their freedom. Although the maniac was arrested and convicted, his sinister house remained a monument to his atrocities, and it is still said that at night the ghosts of his victims are sometimes seen in the windows of the house, and their moans and screams are heard.